I don't care if you're understaffed, move faster or get out of the way. Celia Andrews froze mid-step in the crowded coffee shop, her fingers tightening around her tote bag as the man in front of her barked at the barista. The poor girl behind the counter looked like she was about to cry. The line had been long all morning, but that didn't give this guy the right to treat someone like dirt. Celia stepped forward before her brain could stop her. Hey, maybe try being a decent human being for 5 minutes, she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. She's doing her best, and you yelling isn't going to make your overpriced latte come any faster. The man turned slowly, looking her up and down with a sneer. Mind your business, sweetheart. I just did, she said without flinching. And if you keep being a jerk, I'll do it again. Behind her, someone let out a low chuckle. Celia didn't turn around. She kept her eyes locked on the man's. He muttered something under his breath and stomped off toward the door, leaving the barista blinking in shock. Thank you, the girl whispered. Celia offered her a small smile. He was an ass. You're doing great. Only then did she step back into line and finally glance behind her. The man standing next in line was tall, dressed in a dark wool coat with messy dark hair and a jawline that looked like it belonged in a movie. His charcoal gray suit looked expensive, tailored, like it belonged in a boardroom, not a midtown coffee shop. His eyes deep, unreadable, and fixed right on her held something between amusement and curiosity. Well, he said, that was the most entertaining thing I've seen all week. Celia let out a breath and gave a short laugh. He deserved worse. I swear, I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I didn't say dramatic, he replied, stepping forward as the line moved. I said entertaining. You've got guts. She shrugged, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. I just don't like bullies, especially ones who think yelling at service workers is a personality trait. The man tilted his head, studying her. You always speak your mind like that? She gave a half smile. Only when necessary. They reached the counter together. Celia ordered her usual medium drip, splash of oat milk, and reached for her wallet. The man beside her was quicker. I've got hers too, he said to the barista before Celia could protest. She turned to him, frowning. You really don't have to do that. I know, he said simply, but I want to. The barista handed over 2 drinks with a grateful smile and a little more energy than before. Celia took hers and followed the man to the end of the counter, curiosity now outweighing her hesitation. Thanks. You didn't have to swoop in like some coffee shop hero. I'm no hero. He took a sip of his drink. Just a guy who appreciates someone standing up for what's right. Celia hesitated. I'm Celia, by the way. Silas, he said, offering his hand. His grip was warm and steady. Silas. He smiled but didn't offer a last name. Just Silas. She raised a brow. Mysterious. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and sighed. I've got to run to a meeting, but this was unexpectedly great. Celia nodded, unsure what to say. He pulled a business card from his coat pocket and handed it to her. If you ever want to grab coffee again, without any shouting this time, call me. She looked down at the card. No company name. Just his name, Silas Stanton, and a private number. Her eyes lifted. You always carry cards like this? Only when I meet someone I'd like to see again. He winked once and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her standing there with coffee in one hand and his card in the other. Celia stared down at it, heart thudding a little faster than usual. She wasn't the type to get flustered over a guy, especially not one who looked like he belonged in a penthouse suite. But something about Silas felt different. Like he wasn't just another suit in the city. She tucked the card into her bag. She was already running late for work, and her shift at the art gallery didn't pay enough to mess around with fantasies, but still, she couldn't keep the smile off her face. 3 days later, she found herself walking into a restaurant she couldn't afford on her own. The hostess led her past velvet booths and glittering chandeliers to a private table in the back. Silas stood when he saw her, his dark suit even sharper than before, a bottle of wine already waiting. You came, he said, that same calm confidence in his voice. I almost didn't, she admitted. This place is. Wow. You deserve wow, he said simply, pulling out her chair. And I like surprising people. Dinner was unlike anything she was used to: caviar, truffle risotto, a dessert that looked more like art than food. But it wasn't the food that kept her attention, it was him. Silas was smart, funny, and more real than she expected. They talked about everything: her dream of one day owning her own gallery, his love for architecture, her favorite street tacos in the city. Still, one thing nagged at her. You never told me what you do, Celia said as the waiter cleared the plates. He leaned back. Does it matter? I mean, a little. You're clearly not hurting for cash. Silas ran a hand through his hair, looking almost sheepish. I run Stanton Development. It's a real estate firm. We've got a few properties in the city. Celia blinked. Wait, Stanton Development? As in, the Stanton Tower? The one that basically owns half of Midtown? He nodded slowly. That one. She stared at him. So you're the CEO? Guilty. She leaned back, eyes wide. You're a billionaire. Technically, yeah. Celia stared at him across the table. She should have felt intimidated or out of place. But somehow she didn't. You know, she said slowly, that makes it even crazier that you were standing in line at a regular coffee shop. He laughed. Best decision I made all week. She shook her head, still processing. So you just hang out in coffee shops and buy drinks for strangers? Only for the ones who make my heart stop and call out jerks in public. Celia flushed. She couldn't help it. And when he reached across the table and took her hand, something shifted. Something real. She didn't know where this was going yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She wanted to find out. By the time Celia stepped out of the gallery that Friday night, the rain had already started. Not the gentle, romantic kind either. It was the kind that soaked your shoes in seconds and turned Manhattan into a maze of overturned umbrellas and taxi horns. She tightened her coat around her and hurried toward the subway, her heels slapping against the wet pavement. A sleek black car pulled up abruptly beside her, its tinted window lowering just enough to reveal Silas. Get in, he said, his voice cutting through the rain. You'll catch pneumonia. She hesitated. I'm not exactly dressed for town cars and chauffeurs. Good, he said. Neither am I. She gave the downpour a reluctant glance, then climbed in. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedar, the heat a welcome contrast to the storm outside. Silas passed her a folded handkerchief without a word, and she dabbed at the water streaking her cheeks. You waited out here? She asked, glancing at him. I told you I like surprises. He met her gaze. I was hoping to see where you worked. Didn't expect the monsoon. Celia laughed softly. Most people bring flowers. You bring a luxury sedan. I aim to be memorable. The car eased into traffic, gliding past rows of slick storefronts. She noticed his hand resting on the console between them, close but not quite touching hers. His presence filled the space, quiet, self-assured, but not overbearing. I'm guessing you don't take the subway much, she said, watching him out of the corner of her eye. I own a few of the buildings it runs under, he replied, not boasting, just stating a fact. But I did when I was younger. She raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. Prep school, Ivy League, first startup before you could legally rent a car. He shook his head. Public school. State college. My father was a construction foreman. I learned more watching him on site than I ever did in a classroom. Celia leaned back, surprised. I didn't expect that. Most people don't. They assume a last name and a skyline view tell the whole story. She studied him for a moment. Why tell me? Because you didn't ask about my money the first time we met. You asked why I was being decent. Silence settled between them, not awkward but thoughtful. Outside, the city blurred in streaks of yellow and red. He turned to her. What are you doing tomorrow night? Working. There's a local artist showing at the gallery. I'm helping with setup and running the floor. Cancel. She blinked. I can't just. Not for me, he interrupted gently. For you. I want to show you something. Something I think you'll love. She hesitated. Is this going to involve helicopters or private chefs or, I don't know, A string quartet in the park. He smiled, but it didn't feel rehearsed. No helicopters. No orchestras. Just something real. Trust me. Celia looked at him, the man who had appeared in her life with the kind of intensity books warned you about. Something about the way he waited, not pushing, not assuming, made her nod. All right, I'll come. The car stopped outside her building. Not a penthouse, not marble floors, just a walk-up with a broken buzzer and creaky stairs. Silas looked up at it once, then back at her. "Thank you for tonight," she said, reaching for the door handle. He didn't answer right away. "Celia," she turned. "Do you have any idea how rare it is to meet someone who still sees people instead of titles?" She swallowed, caught off guard by the honesty in his voice. "Maybe, but I think you're more than your title." He nodded once. "Tomorrow, I'll send a car." She stepped out and shut the door behind her before she could say something stupid. Rain still fell, but it felt softer now. Upstairs, she peeled off her wet coat and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She wasn't foolish enough to think this was a fairy tale. Silas Stanton wasn't some lost prince. He was a man who owned half the skyline, and yet he'd looked at her like she was the only thing he wanted to understand. The next evening, the car arrived exactly on time. No driver in a suit, just a man in a worn jacket who greeted her by name. The ride wasn't long, but they crossed the bridge, heading toward Brooklyn. When they arrived, she stepped out into an alley lit by a single antique lantern. Silas waited beside a rusted iron gate, dressed simply in jeans and a dark coat. "What is this place?" she asked as he opened the gate. "You'll see." He led her through a narrow courtyard into a building that looked like an old warehouse. Inside, the space opened into a private gallery, walls lined with unframed canvas, the scent of oil paint still lingering in the air. A few people milled about, all holding wine glasses, all focused on the art. "This is yours," she whispered. "Mine to fund," he said. "The artists are local. They can't afford gallery fees, so I cover them. No press. No buyers with six-figure checkbooks. Just real people and real work." She turned slowly, taking it all in. "Why show me this?" "Because you love art for what it is, not for what it costs." Her eyes found his. "You remembered." "I remember everything you say." A woman approached and handed Silas a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. He took it, then turned to Celia. "This is for you. Don't open it here." She frowned but accepted it. The canvas was light, the kind of thing you'd hang in a quiet corner and stare at for hours. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll come back." "Not just here. With me." She looked up at him, heart-thudding. "I haven't even figured out what this is yet." He stepped closer, voice low. "Neither have I. But I know what it isn't. It's not temporary." Before she could answer, a man called to Silas from across the room. He nodded once, then turned back to her. "I have to handle something. Will you stay?" Celia glanced around the space, at the raw beauty of the art, the warm buzz of conversation, the quiet hum of belonging. "I'll stay." As he walked away, she held the canvas tighter against her chest. Whatever this was, it had just shifted into something deeper. And she wasn't ready to walk away from it. Not yet. Celia didn't open the wrapped canvas until she was home. She sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, the dim light from the single lamp casting long shadows across the hardwood. As she peeled back the paper, her breath caught. It was a painting of a woman standing in a storm. Not drenched or defeated, but tall, chin lifted, eyes locked on something in the distance. Her coat whipped around her body like armor, and behind her, the faint outline of a city loomed. The brushstrokes were raw, deliberate. Fierce, vulnerable. She traced the edge of the canvas, her fingers trembling slightly. He'd seen her, not just in the gallery or at a table with wine and candlelight, but really seen her. And now, he'd handed her a version of herself that she wasn't sure anyone else had ever noticed. The next morning, she placed the painting above her desk. Every time she looked at it, something inside her steadied. That evening, Silas invited her to a dinner, something low pressure, as he'd called it. She arrived at the address he'd sent her, expecting another restaurant. It wasn't. It was a rooftop. One she hadn't known existed, tucked between two high rises in Tribeca. The elevator opened into a garden lit by soft amber lights, vines climbing along the brick walls, a single table set for two beneath a canopy of string lights. "I thought you'd appreciate a view without noise," he said as she stepped out, her eyes wide. "You did all this?" "I made a few calls. The space belongs to a friend of mine. The rest I just rearranged." She walked toward the edge, resting her hands on the stone railing. The skyline stretched out before her, not blinding or overwhelming, but vast and quiet. "I needed this," she said softly. He stepped beside her. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes." "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "But I've been thinking about that painting." He watched her, waiting. "You saw something in me most people don't bother looking for. I don't know what that means yet, but I'm not ready to pretend it didn't happen." He nodded once, then gestured toward the table. "Let's eat before the pasta turns to glue." She laughed, easing into the chair as a server, discreet and silent, appeared with two plates. No menus, no pretense. Just wine, fresh pasta, and warm bread. Halfway through the meal, she leaned forward. "You're not like I expected." "How did you expect me?" "More polished. Less complicated." He met her gaze without blinking. "I am complicated. Then tell me something real. Not curated. Not something you'd say in a meeting." His jaw tightened slightly, but he leaned back, folding his hands in his lap. "My mother left when I was 9. No note, no fight, just gone. My father raised me and my brother on job sites. He used to say concrete never lies. You know where you stand when it sets." Celia's breath caught. "I'm sorry. I'm not," he said. "It taught me to stop expecting people to stay just because they should." She didn't reach for his hand. Instead, she let the silence stretch, unafraid. "I almost didn't go into art," she said after a moment. "I was supposed to be a teacher. Something stable. But every time I tried to walk away from it, I felt like I was shrinking." He didn't speak, just listened. "My sister told me once that if something terrifies you and you still want it, that's the thing you have to do." "Your sister sounds wise." "She's a therapist. She gets paid to say things like that." He laughed, the sound low and genuine. As the night deepened, the air cooled. Silas rose and pulled a soft navy scarf from a nearby chair, wrapping it gently around her shoulders. "I didn't bring you here to impress you," he said. "I brought you here because I wanted one night without noise. Just you. Just me." Celia looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then stop holding back." He hesitated, something shifting in his eyes. "I've dated women who wanted headlines. Women who spoke in sound bites. You don't ask for anything. You just show up. And that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I don't know how to be enough for someone who doesn't need anything from me." She stood slowly, the scarf slipping down her arm. "Maybe I don't want anything from you. Maybe I just want to be seen. And maybe I see you too." They stood there, inches apart, the city behind them and something fragile forming in the space between. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers lingering. "This is new for me," he said quietly. "I don't want to ruin it by rushing." "Then don't rush," she said. "But don't hide either." He nodded once, then leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't showy. It was steady, certain, and filled with something that made her knees weaken. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to be a problem," he said, his voice rough. "Maybe," she whispered. "But I'm not scared of a fight." He smiled at that, and this time it wasn't mysterious or guarded. It was real. Later, when the rooftop emptied and the lights dimmed, he didn't offer to take her home. He just walked her to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited in silence. As the doors opened, she stepped in, then turned to face him. "I'll see you soon," she said. He nodded. "You will." The doors closed, and she leaned against the wall, heart pounding. Whatever they just started, it wasn't temporary. And now there was no turning back. Celia had never seen a penthouse like this, mostly because she'd never been in one. The elevator opened directly into Silas's home, revealing floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Hudson, a piano tucked beside a library wall, and a fireplace already glowing. There was no artifice, no cold show of wealth. Everything felt lived in, curated with purpose. On the glass coffee table sat a leather-bound book of architectural sketches, a half-drunk cup of black coffee, and a folder with marked-up blueprints. She stepped inside, her heels silent on the polished floors. Silas closed the elevator behind them, tossing his keys into a tray without ceremony. "I had to finish something before I could think straight," he said, voice quieter than usual. "But I didn't want to do it without you knowing." Celia turned, her coat still clutched in her arms. "What happened?" He walked to the piano bench, sat, and rested his hands on his knees. "I took my name off a project. That stopped her." "The Midtown redevelopment?" she guessed. He met her eyes. "Yes, it was about to displace 7 local businesses. I tried to negotiate with the board, but they pushed back. So I pulled my signature." She stared at him. "That must have cost you more than I want to admit," he said, cutting her off with a half-laugh. "But less than my peace of mind." She set her coat on the back of a chair and crossed the room slowly. "Why tell me now? Because I wouldn't have done it 2 months ago. Before you." He looked down at his hands. "You made me remember the kind of man I wanted to be before I became the one everyone expected." Celia stood still, heart-thudding. "I didn't ask you to change." "No," he said, lifting his gaze. "But I wanted to." She sat beside him, the silence stretching comfortably now. After a long moment, he asked, "Do you want to see something?" Without waiting, he rose and walked toward a hallway. She followed, passing framed photographs of construction sites, old buildings mid-restoration, a black and white shot of 2 young boys standing beside a man in a hard hat. He opened a door at the end of the hall. Inside was a sunlit room with exposed brick and a large easel in the corner. A tall shelf held jars of brushes, unopened tubes of paint, and empty canvases stacked neatly against the wall. "I had this built years ago," he said, stepping aside so she could enter. "I thought I'd take up painting someday. I never did." Celia turned in a slow circle. "It's beautiful. I want you to use it." She blinked. "What?" "I spoke to the gallery board. You're off the waiting list. You get a solo show next quarter. And this," he gestured to the room, "this is yours until then. Or longer. If you want it." She stepped forward, eyes scanning the space again, this time seeing it not as his, but as something offered. "My lease is up in 2 months," she said slowly. "I was going to move into a studio with bad plumbing and no windows." He leaned against the doorframe. "This one has heating, natural light, and a key with your name on it." Her chest tightened. "You can't just give me things like this." "I'm not giving it to you," he said. "I'm investing in you. The way someone should have a long time ago." Celia stepped toward him. "You're not trying to rescue me, are you?" "No," he said, his voice steady. "I'm trying to stand beside you." She reached up, brushing her fingers along his jaw. "You're very good at knowing what people need. Only when I finally stop thinking about myself." She hesitated. "You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They didn't kiss. Not yet. The moment didn't demand it. It asked for something quieter, more permanent. Later that week, Celia stood in the center of the empty studio, a blank canvas before her. She dipped her brush into Prussian blue, the first stroke bold and unhesitating. Her phone buzzed nearby, a message from the gallery confirming her exhibition date. Downstairs, Silas worked in his office, unaware that she could hear the low murmur of his voice through the floor vents as he argued about preserving a historic building in Soho. That Sunday, he took her to meet his father. They drove upstate to a modest ranch house with a wraparound porch and a dog that barked until Silas knelt and hugged it like an old friend. His father waited at the door, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, with the kind of eyes that had seen everything and judged nothing. "You're the one who made him slow down," he said to Celia after dinner, his accent thick with years of construction sites and long hours. "I didn't mean to," she replied. "Good," the man said. "The ones who mean to never last." On the drive back, Silas reached for her hand and didn't let go until they were inside the elevator again. Days turned into weeks. Celia painted. Silas fought for buildings that couldn't fight for themselves. They had dinners on rooftops and breakfasts in quiet cafes. He surprised her with a trip to a small coastal town where he once spent summers as a boy. She brought him to her favorite dive bar where everyone knew her name but couldn't believe she'd brought the guy from that news article. They didn't talk about love right away. It came slowly in gestures and glances, in the way he never interrupted her when she spoke, in the way she never treated him like something to be impressed by, in the way they made room for each other's past without flinching. It wasn't until the night of her opening that the words came. The gallery buzzed with voices, the walls lined with her work pieces born from that studio, from moments he'd never seen but somehow understood. She stood at the center of it all, surrounded by people, but her eyes searched only for him. He stepped forward, dressed in a suit that had clearly been tailored that day, his tie slightly askew. "You look like a man who's about to do something reckless," she said. "I am," he replied. Then he dropped to one knee. The noise of the gallery vanished. Time paused. "I'm not asking you because I think you need me," he said. "I'm asking because I can't imagine any version of my life without you in it." Celia stared at him, completely still. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She smiled. "You figured out how to make a scene without making it about you. That's impressive." His hand trembled slightly as he held out the ring. "Is that a yes?" She took the ring, slipped it on, and leaned down to kiss him. "That's a forever." The applause was deafening. Champagne flowed. Someone cried, possibly the gallery owner. And later, much later, when they were alone in the studio, her paint still drying and the city humming below, she looked at him and whispered, "You saved my painting." "I just saved your skyline." He pulled her close. "I think we saved each other." And this time, when they kissed, it was everything quiet, certain, and infinite. The wedding was held in the garden behind a quiet estate in the Hudson Valley, far from reporters, shareholders, and anything remotely resembling the world Silas had built his empire in. The guest list was short: family, a few close friends, and the artist Celia had mentored since her show. No press, no spectacle, just the two of them, standing beneath a canopy of wisteria, with the scent of lavender thick in the air, and the sun warming their joined hands. Silas wore no tie, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a trace of paint still beneath one fingernail from helping Celia hang her latest piece in the studio that morning. Celia's dress was ivory with soft tulle that caught the breeze, her curls pinned loosely with small pearl pins she'd found in a thrift shop years ago and never had the right moment to wear until now. When the officiant asked if she would take him as her partner in all things, she didn't hesitate. "I already have," she said. Silas didn't look at anyone else the entire ceremony. His eyes never left her, not even when the wind tugged at the hem of her dress or when the officiant stumbled slightly over his name. He looked at her like he knew exactly what he'd almost lost by building a life on blueprints and forgetting to leave space for the unexpected. After the vows, they walked barefoot across the damp grass toward a long table set with flickering candles and bowls of ripe black cherries. Her sister toasted them with a tear-streaked grin, and Silas's father raised his glass and said, "My boy finally built something that matters." No one spoke for a moment after that. Later, when the guests had gone and the stars had begun to scatter like coins across the sky, Celia and Silas stayed behind. She leaned against the gatepost, her hand resting on his chest, where she could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his heart. "I used to think stability meant walls," she murmured, her head tucked against his shoulder. "But maybe it just means someone who doesn't walk away when the walls fall down." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Nothing about us is fragile. You made sure of that." They didn't go on a honeymoon. Instead, they returned to the city and turned the studio into a shared space. She painted in the mornings, when the light was soft and golden. He worked across from her at the long oak table, sketching plans for affordable artist housing in the Bronx. They argued over who got to use the French press first and laughed when the dog they rescued from a shelter chewed through Silas's Italian loafers. Celia's second solo show sold out before opening night. Not to collectors, but to local museums and foundations that promised to display the work publicly. She used the proceeds to fund a grant for emerging artists. She named it after her mother, who had always said creativity didn't pay rent, but maybe that was only because no one had ever helped her try. Silas began turning down projects. Not all of them, just the ones that came with too many strings and not enough soul. He started walking to work when he could and left his phone at home on Sundays. Once, she caught him sketching a portrait of her while she slept, and when she asked why, he said, "Because it's the only thing that doesn't need revising." They didn't live in the penthouse. They moved into a loft near the studio, with creaky floors and wide windows that let in too much noise and just enough sun. They filled it with mismatched furniture and canvases leaning against every wall. He built her a shelf for her paints. She planted lavender on the fire escape. One afternoon, as summer began to stretch lazily across the city, Celia stood in the gallery speaking quietly to a young artist who had just been accepted into the grant program. She didn't notice Silas slip in behind her. He watched as she handed over the envelope, her touch gentle, her words even. The girl cried. Celia hugged her and promised she was going to do great. Silas waited until the girl left, then stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Celia from behind. She leaned into him without flinching. "You're changing lives now," he said against her ear. "I just remember what it felt like not to be seen." He turned her to face him. "You saw me when I didn't even know I was looking." She smiled, tucking a piece of hair behind his ear. "You let me in when you didn't have to." He kissed her there in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by strangers' dreams and the echoes of his old life. And for once, he didn't think about deadlines or deals or what his board would think. He thought about her, the girl who had once scolded a stranger in a coffee shop and somehow ended up with his heart. Years passed, but some things didn't change. They still went to that same dive bar on Fridays, still argued over what counted as real pizza, still danced across the hardwood floors of their loft when the city went quiet after midnight. She painted the skyline from memory. He built a second studio upstairs when her canvases started stacking too high. When she told him she was pregnant, he didn't say anything at first. Just dropped the spoon he was holding into the sink and looked at her like she'd handed him the entire world. Their daughter was born in spring, with Celia's eyes and Silas's impossible, stubborn jaw. She grew up surrounded by paint and blueprints, by stories told in whispers beneath gallery lights and lullabies hummed while tracing city maps on her bedroom wall. They named her Wren because she was small, fierce, and loud enough to break silence. On Wren's first birthday, they took her to the same rooftop garden where Silas had once lit candles and confessed his fears. The ivy had grown thicker, the skyline different, but the bench was still there, as was the quiet. As the sun dipped low and the lights blinked on across the city, Celia leaned into Silas and rested her head on his shoulder. "You think she'll ever know how close we came to not meeting?" He kissed the top of her head. "Doesn't matter. We did." And in the hush between heartbeats, with the city below and their daughter asleep in her arms, Celia knew. This wasn't a story about a billionaire saving a girl from obscurity. It was a story about two people who had saved each other in every way that counted. They were home, together, forever.